Okay, so today we're going to take a look at pretty much finishing it up with Apple and what they went through. And again, it's because we are talking about the evolution of the computer, the personal computer, what it did for people, how it's changed. Trying to also get into your head that, hey, what you think now is the standard will not be the standard in 15 years. And I will tell you some stories right here about the phone and iPad that you will say, what, that didn't happen. And I'll say, yeah, I was there, I saw it. So anyway, here we are on the screen to share with you. And this is where we were with the iPod. Basically what ends up happening is Apple goes through a couple of processes. Number one, they can't seem to sell their computers. And what I mean by that is nobody will sell them. Back then, you did not go to a website and buy computers. You went to a store and you bought computers. And because Apple was really, really down there, like almost dead, they weren't selling them. So places like Best Buy, there was tons of them. Circuit City was another one. Newegg, which is an online place, used to have stores. There's tons of them, and they no longer sold apples. And I actually have a friend that works at Apple, and he actually, one of the first things he did was he was actually in part of the team that decided or was trying to decide what should an Apple store look like. So I remember when they did this, and this is kind of when I started to pay attention. So I didn't have a Mac computer at the time. But again, I had a friend that was working for them. And so I kind of followed it because he's my friend. And this is where I really started going, whoa, boy, the media really hates them. That's what I started thinking. They really hate Steve Jobs. Anyway, what happened was, right, nobody's selling their computers. So what are you going to do? Do you close your doors, or do you do what Jack Tramiel would have done and beat the system, right? And that's Steve Jobs was exactly that kind of person. If they're not going to let us sell our computers in their stores, we're going to build our own store. But if we're going to build our own store, it's going to drop people dead when they see it. And to tell you the honest truth, it's been part of business studies since they opened these stores of how do you move people into a store and why are people going to these stores, and maybe stores shouldn't look like Kmart or Walmart. Maybe they should be something different. Yeah, if you've never done it, right, you're one of these Apple haters, or you just never considered it. If you go over Chandler Mall has, we call it Chandler Fashion Center. They actually have a Microsoft store and they have an Apple store. And walk by either both of them in either order and see what the difference is. Right? Microsoft stores came out later, and I like them. I really like them. I like how they're laid out. But if you see how many people are coming into the Apple store compared to a Microsoft store, it is a night and day difference. Go to Apple store, place is packed. Go to Microsoft store, 4 people. Right, and that's part of what they didn't get, right? Microsoft is like, oh, wow, we can do that. Look how many people they're getting in there. Let's design a store like it, but we'll do it with color, which is awesome. Awesome. I really do like their stores. But it's also the products you're selling. So anyway, back to the story. Apple decides to build these stores, and honestly, my friend is telling, I'd ask him stories, stories. They opened one in Japan. He was part of that team that opened stores. And he would have shirts from the different stores that now sell for hundreds of dollars, and started to become this thing where people would actually travel to the opening of stores. Just incredible. He didn't actually go to this one, although he was heavily responsible for negotiating it, like the one in Dubai. And so he showed me some pictures that, one of his underlings, the people that work for him, sent him. It's like, holy crap, that store is incredible. That's Apple's, what Steve Jobs turned that into. Like, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it right. We're not going to just do it like everybody else did it. But that became an important factor. And so these iPods are what carries them into the next generation of what's happening. The Apple stores are kind of the way to try to make sure they're selling computers, but the computers are not selling that much. And then the iPod comes out and boom, sales just go through the roof. And then basically for the next several years, Apple is making pretty much 80% of its money off of iPod sales, not off of computer sales, even though people still we'll talk to them about the computers, right? Well, what happens when you see a shift in technology where all of that stuff is moving to the phone? Now, if this phone was super cheap, right? If a smartphone was super cheap, then chances are you would have stayed with two separate devices because, let me just explain, right? Two separate devices, not fun to take with you, right? That's not fun. But they usually are really, really good at whatever they focused on. That's why, you know, there's all those commercials for kitchen things that do a billion things and people buy them and then they never use them. They want a thing that does one thing. This is my blender, this is my beaters, right? This is my spoon, right? They want separate things. And so we probably, if it would have been cheap enough, right, we would have had something this small with tons of space, and then something that was not this big, tons of space, and that would have suited us. But these things are so expensive, I don't want to really spend money on both. Apple saw it coming, right? They understood, whoa, this is going to kill us. We don't make phones. We don't make a phone. So are we going to just watch our MP3 players basically squeeze down to nothing as people buy phones that do the same thing? Or should we get into the phone market? And there's so many articles at the time that like Apple's the stupidest company in the world. I can't believe that they're going to make a phone. They're such idiots, never going to get anywhere. Phones do what they do, blah, 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 blah. And you can look them up, things people said about iPhones. And they were just ridiculous. Now, at the time, maybe they didn't seem so ridiculous. But by this time, I kind of picked up on the fact that you have to see these shifts in technology. And this is really where, thankfully, it didn't have to affect me, but it wouldn't have been a problem because I was actually getting out of that and doing teaching full time. But again, it wouldn't have been a problem for me because I saw this shift. I'd been using smartphones forever. So when Apple came out with theirs, I was like, oh, that's nice. You know, it's Apple, so whatever. They make good products, it's nice, but I've been using a smartphone, so it's nothing new to me. This, some people will probably pick up on that and do something with it. And so I was an early adopter of that. And then I started watching what was happening. And then I started reading what people were saying, and I started to understand this is another area where Steve Jobs has gotten it. And they did this not because they wanted to show people that they could do it. They did it because they're, how are they going to stay in business when this goes away? You know, their Macs are only 20% of their income. The other 80 is these. So we've got to start selling that. That's an iPod Touch, but you know what I mean. You got to start selling the first gen iPhone. I always put eyes in front of everything back then because that was to tell the dumb people that it was internet capable. First gen. So they bring out this, and basically it's huge. That's what everybody says. This is too big. It's too big of a phone. Doesn't have a real keyboard. It's never going to make it. It's so expensive. It's a $600 phone. Nobody can afford to buy it unless it's subsidized. So what they're really thinking of is, I have a phone that calls people. That's what I have. And then there's this small pocket of people like me that use a smartphone, and those are a little bigger, but we try to keep them really tiny. And you can do other stuff on them, but it's still really just a phone. They weren't seeing, no, technology is shrinking down so much that your computer is moving to this. That's what it's moving to. That there's a shift from, I won't be using my PC in the corner anymore. I won't even be using my notebook as much. I'll be using my phone. So I'm trying to tell you, back then, that's not what you did. If you were really fancy, you had a notebook and you used it all the time. And you used your phone for texting, which was really awkward most of the time, even on a smartphone. And you just, that's what you did, right? And if you weren't ready for that, then you got munched, right? Who's BlackBerry? Some of you might remember who BlackBerry is. Actually, these days, I actually get a few people that might remember this. Like, they made phones, right? There's a BlackBerry. Here's the killer app for a BlackBerry. They took over the market. And the reason they took over the market is they had a secure messaging server. These days, people just don't even care if they have a secure messaging server. But back then, it was like, how can I send a message to my employee without my competitor knowing what it is? Because texting was all clear text. And so they had a messaging server that you could actually set up a business. And so most businesses would use these, government used these because it was more secure, more private. What? Privacy, right? And so BlackBerry was the big dog. They had come in and taken things away from Microsoft. Right, this is the new Microsoft phones. That's an incredible interface. Just absolutely loved it. But Microsoft was late to the game. Now wait a minute. Microsoft wasn't late to the game. Let's look up one from, we'll say 98. So this is a PDA. That's not actually a phone, but that's basically what the phone would have looked like, except it wouldn't have been as big. And so they had what they called Microsoft CE, Windows CE, or Windows Mobile, and the start button was up at the top, and you'd hit it, and the start button would come down. And then you would use basically a Windows type interface. They were around forever, guys. And so when Apple came in, their attitude was like, whatever. You know, we've been in this niche market forever. And Apple doesn't know that you're just getting into an overfilled niche smartphone market. Well, of course, that's not what happened, is it? What happened was that the iPhone revolutionized what people thought about phones. And all of a sudden, this became a computer communications device and a phone second. We still call them smartphones. But strangely enough, we don't use the phone portion hardly at all, right? We use all the messaging, all the different ways of communicating, all that, getting on websites. We use all that stuff, not actually the phone portion. And so they did this because they understood chips are getting small enough, it's getting powerful enough. We're losing our MP3 market. We have no choice but to try to define this market. And so then they did. I have another time I talk about this. I don't know if that'll be before this one or after this one, that talks about Intel and their debacling of what they could have done. So in the mere fact that Apple does this, they end up pretty much owning the market for several years. And I will tell you, you cannot find this anymore. And I probably won't be able to pull it up now. I need to pull it up and put it into class. First version of Android. Why Apple ended up hating Android or Google so much was actually, this is kind of it right here. Why they hated them so much is that basically, unwisely, Steve Jobs invited Eric Schmidt onto the board so that Google would make an app, a searching app for their phone. And so Google got to see all this internal stuff that most people wouldn't have been able to see. And then they went out and totally changed what Android looked like. And I can't really find one of those pictures. But the first version of Android just basically, not surprisingly, copied the biggest maker at the time, which was BlackBerry. Right? So it looked a lot more like this. And then they got the heads up that, hey, this iPhone's going to come out. We want you to build a search for it. And there was really going to be this partnership until, dun, da, 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 hi, we're Google, and we're going to make this Android phone. And we basically just ripped off everything from what we saw Apple do. Now, it's not a total ripoff because icons have been around forever, right? It's like, kind of, come on, icons have been around. But they really switched gears. There was proof that they had made it off of menus and just like BlackBerry, and then they started doing what what Apple did. So now you end up with two. I honestly don't know why there's this kind of crap. We seem to, in America, in the US, to be able to be just a two-team kind of personality philosophy, right? We don't have basketball teams basketball games with three teams. It's only two, so therefore everything only has to have two. The auto industry is definitely not that way, right? We don't just have like a Chevy Ford battle. Some people do, but there's lots of other car manufacturers out there. But operating systems, right? Two, that's all we got. We got Apple and Android, and that really stifles things, to tell you the truth. And I was really disappointed when Microsoft stopped their phone. Microsoft Phone Tandem, whatever you call it. I really, it was so nice. I had one. It worked really, really well. And they were just so ticked off that they only had 10% of the world market. We only got like 1 million users instead of like 1 billion. Like that's like they pulled out. It's like, thank goodness Apple didn't do that back in the day, right? They didn't have very many users for their computers, but they kept doing it. I really hate that fact that Microsoft dropped out of that. I'm hoping eventually they'll come back. In any case, that's what ends up happening to Apple, why they end up making the phone, and the fact that because Steve Jobs could look at the industry and see these shifts and be able to say this is where it's going was vital. Now, how did that really fit into IT? Well, there was a lot of IT people that lost their jobs because they hated Apple. So back then, businesses, right? Businesses used to buy your phone for you. And what, I'm not joking, what really changed this was the fact that the CEOs and the people that had money, right? We talked about that social part of it. These people that had money and were innovators were basically like, I get one of those iPhones. And they went out and just bought them themselves. And then they went into work and like, hey, I can get on Wi-Fi with this and set it up. Here's my phone. And they're like, oh, well, that won't work. That's an Apple device and we don't run those and that won't work. IT was very used to just getting their way with anything and saying whatever they wanted, and people go, oh, okay. But this was a big enough social push that basically bosses got to the point where it was like, so you're telling me that I can't run this on the internet here at work on the Wi-Fi here because this is Apple and we use Microsoft. That's what you're telling me, right? Well, okay, make this work or you're fired. And people got fired. I knew people that got fired because they were just jerks about it. You're like, oh, I'm not going to do that. I know what I'm doing. And you don't know what you're doing. And this iPhone thing is just a big craze. It's just going to go away. It's not going to be there anymore. People get fed up with it. It's too expensive. It's blah, blah, blah. It's blah, thrown out of the stuff. iPhones haven't gone away, right? It's not, the only thing that's making them go away is if Apple screws up, right? So you may have your opinion on what you think, but market forces, research and development, all that stuff, if you start understanding it, you'll realize they're not going away unless they just really miss a step, which any company can do if they're not watching. And there was tons of IT people that they really put up a fight with it. At the very least, if the ones didn't get fired, all of a sudden their bosses knew that guy's not so smart, right? I thought he was this really smart guy. And now it looks like he just does things based off of what he likes and doesn't like. So I got to be a little weary about that. I don't respect him so much. Right? That is one of the biggest ways that you're going to get yourself in trouble in IT if your mind is not open. I had a student come in once and he was bragging about the fact that he's like, yeah, the great thing about being in IT is people just do what you say. So my grandma wanted a phone and I told her, yeah, you don't want one of those iPhones because that's what she was going to get. And I told her, yeah, don't get one of those iPhones. What you got to get, he talked like that, by the way. What you got to get is one of these Androids. Now, Android now is a lot different than Android then. And I was like, well, that works up until the product that you told them to get doesn't do what they say. He's like, what? I was like, well, the one thing that I would say if I was ever remarking to an old person, I would say, have you used a smartphone? No, then get an iPhone. Now, why would I say that? Am I just bigoted towards Apple and I'd like them to spend the money? No, because that iPhone is going to do what they want without getting any viruses on it, without getting any malware on it. And heaven forsakes, old people have that problem already with their Windows machines. Don't make it more complicated for them. So unless you're willing to go in and put a virus scanner on it and make sure that nobody else installs anything on there other than what grandma needs, which is not going to happen, right? Kids are going to install games and all of a sudden, why do I keep getting this pop-up? Right. And yeah, that happens. So if you're on Android and you're thinking, that's never happened to me, awesome. That means you use it correctly, but it happens to a ton of people because there's tons of viruses on them. They come and you can get one, and I'm not joking, you can get one through a text, whole nother thing to talk about. And on iOS, it's much more limited. So you could say, oh, it does happen though. Yeah, that's not the point. The point is grandma needs a phone and she needs it to work. And if I am fulfilling what that person needs, I'm going to say, get an iPhone because it will work and they won't have problems. And what will they think of me when that happens? You are a flipping genius. That phone does what I want it to do. Right. So that comes back to me as it's doing what they want it to do. Everything works fine on it. And they think I'm a genius. Now, the reason I asked them, have you used a smartphone before, is because if they say, yeah, I have. What do you have? Well, I have a Samsung. I've been using that for about 6 years. You should stick with that. A Samsung? Well, something that's got Android on it. And that would be my answer to them. I would also expand it and say, we need to make sure we get you virus checking. So let's get AVG or Sophos on there or something like that, just to make sure you're okay. And don't let your grandkids just install something like, hey, I'll help you out, Grandma. Let me install this. No. Don't let anybody do anything to your phone. You use it for these things, and as long as it's doing those things, you're good to go. I'm not going to go, oh, you should get an iPhone. You should switch. And why? Because they're familiar with Android. They're familiar with how that works. They know how it functions. Now, if they're going to come to me for tech support all the time, right, then I'm going to say, I'm going to get an iPhone because I don't want to have to go, oh, that's not on this menu. That's over on this menu. Oh, yeah, you can't do that because you don't have the version they have. I don't want to deal with that stuff. Otherwise, stick with what you got. That's what's going to happen. And so that's part of what you have to do as IT. These moves majorly shift. You need to be able to sit back and go, what's going on here? And if I don't like it, why is it that I don't like it? And I say this in my operating systems class all the time because they have to use Linux and Mac OS and Windows. And I will always have people balk at Mac OS, right? They won't balk at Linux because see, Linux is the techie. That's, like you gotta be really techie to use that. So I can't make fun of that. But I hate Mac OS. And I always say, have you used Mac OS much? No, that's why you hate it. People hate things they don't know. So instead of saying, oh, I hate that, say, well, I really don't know much about it. You're in technology. It's time to not be the person that just hates something because they don't know how it works. It's time to be like, I would never say, oh, I hate Android because I don't know anything about it. Frustrates me. Okay, then I need to admit, I really don't hate Android. I just don't know what I'm doing on it. And that's frustrating to me, right? Now, do I like Android? There's some freaking cool stuff on Android. I just wish there was a middle ground where I could have the privacy that I have on my iPhone on Android. And no, please don't send me a 15-step walkthrough that says this is how you're going to be safe, because Google's watching everything you do. All right, so that's why. That's why I'm showing you, hey, this is what Apple did. This is how they survived. This is where they could have died. And Steve Jobs is that one that was like, hey, we got to take advantage of this new scenario that's coming in because these computers are getting smaller, getting tinier, and everything's going to move to these. And if we can make a phone that's really worth something, we'll be in on that instead of totally out on it, which is where Microsoft is. Now, just to end with what happened with Microsoft, since they actually were in there first, they misinterpreted what was happening. So they get in really early on the smartphone thing, and it's cool. They do some cool stuff, but it's very much a Windows way of doing things. I want to install an app. I'll go to this little website, can't read it. I'll click on that link, and then that'll download it to my phone, and then I'll go over here and find it, and I'll click on that, and then that'll come over here and then start to install it. And then I'll go to the start menu and I'll be able to get to it. You see, that's very much Windows, right? That's the way it works. What Apple did was they said, no, let's not make it like the Mac. Let's look at what we want to do for the future. right? People don't get in their car, throw 15 switches and handles, and then finally start driving. They get in their car, turn the key, and drive. And so they basically said, we need it easier. If we give them a place where they can get apps, so they can just go there and there they are, and they hit it and it downloads, and now you can just run it, right? That's revolutionary. Microsoft never did anything like that, and they didn't do it until Apple showed them how to do it. Nobody did it until Apple said, this is how it should be done. And the only reason why, because they actually looked and said, this is how we do it now on our PCs and our Macs. How can we make that better? Right? We want people want to use a phone like, hello, how are you? Right? That's what they want. They do not want, hi, right? They just want to be able to use it. And that's what they implemented. That's probably the biggest reason when I looked at what was happening on there, even though I didn't have an iPhone for years, I was like, that's going to be huge, right? We're going to start to see applications moving over to this phone. Anything that's vital to have mobily will be on our phone, and we won't go to our computer to get it anymore. And then they're making it so that grandma can use that, so that a 4-year-old can use that. And nobody else in the industry had thought of doing it. Anyway, that's my thoughts on the matter, and some of the stuff that basically happens out there, and it's going to happen again. I'm probably going to be retired probably by the next time it really happens and really pushes forward. But I want you guys that as you're in your career, you don't get grounded in that you don't become that person that's like, well, we only use Apple stuff and it's always been that way, and this new fancy thing just does the same thing. You need to look and say, why is that being adopted? Why do people care about that? Is that going to be just a fad, or is that going to be something that really takes over? Why is that happening? And that doesn't mean you have to go out and get it right then. I didn't get an iPhone right then. I just watched what was happening. And then I could tell my classes, hey, that's got to be big. You know, watch that. That's going to be really big. Because I could see, regardless of what the internet's saying, I could see, oh, wow, this is becoming easier and easier. It's going to be staying. All right, we will talk to you later.